G'day, I'm Matt. This channel's called The Right Car, and this car right here is the Jeep Grand Cherokee, the new 5-seat version. There is an L, or a long version, which has 7 seats, but this one is the 5-seater, and in this review I'm going to tell you what I think about it. It's not all good news. The last generation version of the Grand Cherokee was pretty good value for money, especially around 2014 when they had a $42,000 drive-away version. But these days, not so much. The entry-level version is called the Night Eagle for the new generation model, and it's almost $80,000. Yes, that is expensive, but it does come reasonably well equipped for the money that you're spending on it. That version comes with auto LED lights and LED daytime running lights. You've got 20-inch alloy wheels as well. There's sat-nav, a 10-inch media screen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, that's wireless as well. You've got a 10-inch digital driver info display too. Plus, there's other stuff like heated front seats and a heated steering wheel, fake leather interior trim too. So it does look and feel the part. Dual zone climate control, an electric boot. So you can see why it does seem like pretty good value. Stepping up a few $1,000s to the limited version gets you some extra stuff that you will appreciate. It's also got 20-inch wheels, but they look different. It's got auto high beam lights, which you don't get in the base model. You also get cooled front seats, driver's seat memory settings. There's also electric adjustment for the steering column and heated second row seats, just to name a few of the extras that you get. And then there's this one here, which is the top spec. It's almost $100,000. Which seems like a lot of money to me. I wouldn't be buying this one if I was looking at a Grand Cherokee, but if you are buying this one, you're getting the most hardcore four-wheel drive system you can get, the low-range transfer case, the Quadra-Track, or whatever it's called. Plus, you also get air suspension, so it's adjustable air suspension, so you can lift it or lower it depending on what you need. Adaptive dampers as part of that suspension setup as well. You also get LED front cornering lights, and you get different 20-inch alloy wheels and a panoramic sunroof too. So you tell me if you think that's good value for money at $100,000 plus on road costs. But I don't necessarily think it's the best value you can get if you're looking for a large SUV like this, especially because it's only got 5 seats. There is a 7-seat version called the Grand Cherokee L, and it has an even higher spec version called the Summit Reserve, and it's very expensive. I wouldn't buy it either. Usually this alternative section of the video comprises of about 3 different options, but honestly there are so many choices you could be making instead of the Jeep Grand Cherokee. If you've got a decent budget to spend at least. Even if you don't, you could be looking at a Ford Everest, which is a fantastic family SUV with 5 or 7 seats, 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, and plenty of really good stuff packaged into it. It's really nice to drive. There's a V6 diesel or a 4-cylinder twin-turbo diesel, both of which are fantastic. And I really rate that vehicle as a family SUV that you should be looking at if you're looking at something like this, or you have any pretense of planning to go off-road or do towing. Another option you probably should be checking out is the Hyundai Palisade. If you want a big SUV with lots of street cred, it's got that in spades. There's 7 or 8 seat versions available, a couple of trim levels. There's also diesel and petrol available, and it is a really nice, large, luxurious family SUV. Certainly makes a lot more sense money-wise, if you ask me. And if you want something that is 4-wheel drive capable, if you plan to do that sort of driving with your family SUV, then another really good option, if you are looking in this higher end price bracket, is a Land Rover Defender 110. Fantastic vehicle. I really rate it, and you don't have to go spending $250K on the top spec V8 version like the one I drove. Hit the link at the top of the screen to check that out. But if you buy a D300, for example, at less than $100,000, you are getting a whole lot of 4-wheel drive capable SUV. Look, it doesn't have the best reputation for reliability, but nor does Jeep. This one is the small Grand Cherokee, despite being more than 4.9 meters long, 2.1 meters wide, and almost as tall as I am at just over 180 centimeters. So this car is certainly not a small vehicle, even though it's the smaller of the Grand Cherokee models. There's now an L version, which has 3 rows of seats, and it's about 30 centimeters longer. So It's a big bopper, more than 5.2 meters, but look, this car has its own spot to sit. It's a 5-seater with a big boot. Let's check it out. If you believe Jeep, there is more than 1,000 litres of cargo capacity in the boot of the Grand Cherokee. That's a lot of cargo capacity, although it doesn't actually look like more than 1,000. That's the thing with different measurements and different systems of measurement that are applied by different brands. You know, this might look like 600 litres of cargo capacity depending on how they measure it. So I don't think this is 1,000 litres in the normal terminology, which is usually VDA. But anyway, it's a pretty big boot. Definitely practical enough for a family of 3, 4, or 5. You can fit a pram, some luggage, all that sort of stuff in here as you would expect. Under the boot floor, you will find a space saver spare wheel. Not a full-size spare, although it is basically the size of a full-size wheel. So it's pretty handy when it comes to that. Obviously, you'd expect that being a Jeep, being off-roady, all that sort of stuff. And there's a little storage section here. One thing that I do love about the Jeep Grand Cherokee is that it keeps the boot close button there instead of up here, which just makes it a little bit more user-friendly if you're a short person, for example. Yeah. The interior of this new generation Grand Cherokee is a nice place to be. I'll give it that. Look, I know I've been a little bit harsh on this car so far, and there are some elements to the interior that I don't love, but generally the impression that you get when you sit in this new generation model is that you're sitting in something that is approaching that sort of price tag that it's asking, which is a nice thing to see, although it doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes. There's still some pretty hard sort of plasticky bits around the place as well. These seats are a lovely material finish. They're very comfortable. They've got nice active bolstering that gives you a little hug when you sit inside, and it's a very nice seat in terms of comfort. Now, one thing that's maybe a little bit strange about this car, it's like there's a ghost of left-hand drive vehicles past, because when you do turn on the heated steering wheel, for example, it shows up on the left-hand side of the car. And if you adjust the right side temperature on the screen, it'll come up on the left side, it'll sort of flash up. So that is a little bit annoying for someone who likes attention to detail like me. I don't love that. But I do like that there are knobs and dials and buttons down below the screen to control everything as easily as you possibly can. You've got seat buttons there for your cooling and heating, heated steering wheel button. You've got a recirc button, which I really always like to see, demister buttons, all that sort of stuff, volume and tuning knobs. So you don't have to do everything through this screen, thankfully, but it is a pretty good screen, I've got to say. I've been using Apple CarPlay for the most part. There is sat-nav as well if you need it, and there's a few other controls and menus on the screen if you want them as well. Plus, I like that there's a button up the top here for the lane keeping assistance, so you can switch that off if you want to. Otherwise, you'd have to go through the screen and adjust it. I don't think you can actually turn it off through the screen. You have to press the button instead. There's a screen in front of the driver as well, as you've come to expect these days. It's a decent size, pretty easy to get used to, good information available to you there. There's buttons on the steering wheel to adjust that. But another thing about the steering wheel buttons, there's actually a volume button behind where your fingers sit, essentially, near the paddle shifter. So you might find that you are a bit confused by how to control the volume if you don't want to reach over here, but just reach over here if you're not sure. Now, the four-wheel drive system controls are all down here near the gear selector. You've got your height adjustment button down here. It's actually a little trigger. And then you've got your different drive modes. So rock, sand and mud, snow, auto and sport. I've been driving in auto most of the time in this car. There's also a four-wheel drive low range button there too. Storage, good. Bottle holders in the doors, wireless charger here. You've got 4 USB ports and a 12 volt up here as well, which is good to see. Couple of cup holders between the seats with a nice cover. Then you've got a covered center console bin with a double tier opening, another storage section underneath there. So it is definitely a practical cabin and it feels pretty good for the money. Let's check out if the back seat lives up to it. Space in the back seat of the Grand Cherokee is very good. Look, it's a big 5-seater and it feels like that when you're sitting in the second row. This seat is set for me at 182 centimeters or 6 foot tall. And behind it, I've got heaps of leg room, lots of foot room, lots of headroom as well, even with this amazing large panoramic sunroof, which my daughter loved. She thought it was a great view out the roof of this car. Now, speaking of my daughter, she was very comfortable back here because of a few things, right? So she's still in a child's seat, and there's ISOFIX points on the window seats, and they've got these very clever Velcro attached sort of cover where if you're not using the seats then fine, but this actually sort of protects the seat below it when you do have a child seat fitted. So I really thought that was a nice piece of design. She liked it back here because there's directional air vents, there's heating and cooling and dual zone climate control back here as well. And if you aren't in a child seat, like I'm not right now, there's also rear seat heating and cooling as well. So it is very accommodating. And if you've got kids, they'll appreciate that there are blinds on the windows as well. Another thing, there's also directional air vents in the pillars. So you get a lot of airflow in the back and it makes it feel pretty luxurious, I have to say. Yep. Jeep's done well here, and when it comes to storage, there's bottle holders in the doors. You've got a couple of mat pockets on the seat backs, fold down armrest with cup holders. Yeah, maybe I'm starting to understand this car a little bit more. It's a great backseat experience. The best and most popular engines from the last generation version of the Grand Cherokee haven't been carried over to this one. So there's no Hemi V8, 5.7 or 6.2 litre. There's no diesel anymore either, and that's a real problem if you ask me, because diesel was one of the best ways to get around in a Grand Cherokee, but doesn't exist anymore. So instead we're lumped with this 3.6 litre V6 petrol engine. It's a Pentastar engine. You can see the power and torque figures on your screen now. They are not fantastic for a vehicle of this size and this weight, and it isn't the most enjoyable engine and transmission. It's an 8-speed auto. I'll tell you more about that in the driving section, but yeah, you really find that this engine revs hard to get anything done. Now, speaking of revving hard, the towing capacity is less than the benchmark level. It's 2,813 kilos, which is probably something to do with how many pounds it can tow in US language, but that's well below the benchmark in this sort of segment, which is 3.5 tons brake towing capacity. So yeah, doesn't feel like it's the right engine for this car. So what's this Jeep Grand Cherokee like to drive? Well, this particular version, as I mentioned, is the Overland one. So it has the cleverest suspension you can get in the entire range, and it does feel pretty clever in terms of the way that it controls itself on the road. It's got air suspension, so you can adjust the height of the car, and it's also got adaptive damping control as a part of that, and that means that it should be able to handle itself differently depending on what the circumstances are on the surface below you. So if it's really bumpy, it should be able to control itself pretty nicely, while if you are going on seriously off-road heavy duty courses, then it should be able to handle that sort of shit too. And it does. Look, it's a pretty impressive ride for a car of this size that weighs this much. It is a big heavy old thing, and it does drive pretty nicely because of the suspension, the way that it controls itself in corners, the way that it controls the body of the car over bumpy sections of road is impressive. So I get that. Also, the steering is pretty good. It's much more direct and accurate than the last Grand Cherokee that I drove, which was a few years ago now, and it does have a nice amount of heft to it, but also you can sort of judge where it's going to go by the feel through the steering wheel as well, which I like. So those elements are pretty good. What isn't as impressive is the V6 petrol engine. Yes, I've already mentioned that it's not the best engine from the last generation one, but it's the carryover one into this new generation. And honestly, look, it does the job, but it does also at times feel like you are wringing its neck just to get what you need out of it. Look, it doesn't have as much torque as a 2-litre turbocharged petrol hatchback, so it doesn't do as easy a job of moving all this weight as it could. And what that means is that you will notice that if you do have to put your foot down to go a little bit quicker, it will rev out to 5,000 RPM after it changes down a gear. And look, it's just a bit unsettled. It just doesn't need to be as aggressive in the way that it behaves because it doesn't have enough torque to behave in a relaxed way. So I find it, honestly, a little bit hard work to live with from the engine and transmission perspective. The 8-speed auto does have a pretty good logic to it. Like, it'll also downshift when it thinks that you're going to be slowing down for a corner, so that's kind of neat. But I just also find that this engine, like I said, not enough torque, and it makes it feel like you have to work it hard to get anything out of it. However, if you're not the sort of person who's always pushing to go a little bit quicker on the highway or pushing to overtake or whatever it may be, if you're just a light-footed, right-footed driver, then you might find that it's fine. And in city situations or in, urban driving, doing the daycare pickup and drop off, that sort of thing, I've found that it is okay, but not as good as I would hope it could be. Okay, the official combined cycle fuel consumption figure for this new generation model is 9.9 litres per 100 Ks. That's what you should be able to achieve across a mix of driving. I haven't seen anywhere near that during my time with this car, and like I said, it's largely to do with the fact that as soon as you put your foot down beyond a quarter throttle, you will find that the gearbox wants to kick back a gear and it wants to rev its ass off, and so you end up using much more fuel than you probably should. You'll see my result on your screen now after a week of driving this car, and suffice to say, I wasn't overly impressed with that. So, if you choose a 7-seat version of the Grand Cherokee, you get a 5-star ANCAP safety rating. Same if you choose the plug-in hybrid model, but if you choose one of the petrol versions of the short wheelbase 5-seat Grand Cherokee, you only get a 4-star ANCAP safety rating due to what the safety authority says is a poor performance recorded for the rear passenger in the full-width frontal crash test. But it still comes with heaps of safety technology as standard across the entire range, including autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian, cyclist and junction detection. There's lane keeping assistance, lane departure warning, blind spot monitoring, and rear cross traffic alert as well. There's also rear AEB, which is a nice thing to have, and a reversing camera and front and rear parking sensors. If you buy the limited or the overland version, you also get a surround view camera. Honestly, you're asking almost 80 grand for the base model. I reckon a surround view camera should be standard. So I would say that you really should get that as standard. If you buy the limited or the overland, you also get a rear view camera washing system, so that'll help clean things up if you're on a muddy road trip. And when it comes to airbag coverage, you've got 8 inside this car, including dual knee airbag coverage for front passenger and the driver, which is kind of neat. Jeep's reputation for after-sales care in Australia isn't fantastic. However, the brand says that it is promising to do better, and it now has a 5-year, 100,000 kilometre warranty. There's also 5 years of cap price servicing, and it's pretty affordable for that period, $399 per service. However, you need to know that the service intervals are every 12 months or 12,000 kilometres, which is less than most other brands ask you to bring your car back for servicing. Also, there is 5 years roadside assist, but only if you service through a Jeep dealership. I can totally understand why you might like this car. It looks cool, it's got lots of practicality, lots of safety tech, lots of other tech on the inside, very comfy back seat, big boot, serious four-wheel drive capability. Yeah, I get all of that. Bit more premium than the last Jeep Grand Cherokee was too, sure, but it's $100,000 with a petrol V6 engine in 2023. To me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. And I know that you're probably thinking that, hey, it's a four-wheel drive and it's seriously capable off-road. Yeah, it is, but so is a Ford Everest for a whole lot less money. Fight with me in the comments. All right, see you in the next one. Like and subscribe.